Hello, I'm Ben Orchard.
And I'm Claire Fitzpatrick.
Welcome to Sword, Sorcery and Synthesizers, the 80s fantasy movie podcast. I'm coming to you from Adelaide.
And I'm in Brisbane.
But through the wonders of modern technology and the magic of Skype, we meet each week to discuss some beloved movie of a bygone era and see what lies behind the nostalgia. So Claire, you've got an essay published in the latest issue of Aureolus magazine.
Yep, it's 176. It's called Anime Adaptations of Speculative Fiction and the Rising Popularity of Anime in Australia.
Well, no, that's something I'd like to talk to you about, the, popularity of anime in the West. I mean, what do you think it boiled down to?
I think, so one of the really good things I like about it is anime adaptations of literature. It offers a unique blend of visual artistry and imaginative storytelling. So it doesn't really matter where it comes from. I think that interest in it, it can span any country, I think, as well. But also I think in Australia we had this sort of not resurgence, but we had a lot of interest after World War II, which is really weird. And in the 1960s and 70s, we had this wave of Japanese programs that were broadcast in Australia. So I think starting from then, which people didn't realize was such a decent long time ago, it just happened in Australia. It caught on, and people were really interested in it, which I found really interesting when I was researching it. So, yeah, I think it was really surprising to hear it's been part of Australian culture for such a long time.
Well, can I just tell you the appeal of Japanese anime for me personally? I think it reflects a difference between Japanese culture and Australian culture or American culture or, European culture, in that in the West, I should say, animation is often considered an inherently juvenile medium. And the range of subject matter that is considered, suitable for an animated treatment is rather limited. Which is not to cast shade on any of the sort of fine family entertainment that has been produced in this medium in the West, but in Japan, animation isn't considered an inherently juvenile thing, and you see in Japanese anime a huge diversity of themes, of subjects in terms of storytelling. And you see that there's Japanese anime that is very much, adults only. There are, works of anime that you could classify as erotic thrillers or, very, dark action movies or horror fiction, as well as children's stories and, fantasy or science fiction, a whole range of things. There's as much a variety of genres within Japanese anime as there is in live action cinema.
I think that's really interesting, and I think it's a note about Japan as a society. Obviously, I'm just generalizing here. I'm no expert in Japanese society, but they seemed to not to dumb down for things. You know what I mean? They seem to encourage learning about these, perhaps with the adult themes, but they do so in a way that children learn these things. They learn about what it's like to, growing up and changes and becoming an adult. And I think it's actually a really interesting way to, prepare kids for life. There's so many ideas that you can just learn about through characters. And, there's thematic depth and complexity in Japanese animation, which is why I think now many people who attend pop culture conventions are in their 30s and 40s because they watch a lot of the popular ones when they were younger. I think it's just really interesting, really cool.
Well, what you said about not dumbing down the material and nuanced drama that is aimed at a juvenile audience, that is sort of preparing children for life in the big bad adult world, that sort of neatly segues into the film I'd like to talk about today, Kiki's Delivery Service from Studio Ghibli, 1989 film. It's also a literary adaptation. It's based on the novel by Iko Kodono. I'm sure that I'm going to get a lot of pronunciations wrong over the course of this episode. It is very much aimed at a younger audience, but I think it can be watched and enjoyed by adults as well. I think can be experienced, as a family. And I think it imparts a lot of, important life lessons without being, too preachy about it.
I think I mentioned when I watched it, it was with my daughter. She's actually 12 today. So happy birthday, Isabel. Which is great. But we both took away different things from it. And I've really enjoyed watching it, not only with her, but I just found it so interesting for me as well as an adult. So it's one of those movies that I thought it spans like generational interest.
Oh, just to clarify with Kiki's Delivery Service, was this one of those 80s films that, you grew up with watching as a child and you loved it and you treasured it and then you passed down the torch of fandom to the next generation? Or was this like a mutual process of discovery for the two of you?
Mutual process of discovery. I think I've mentioned in another episode that a lot of these things that we will be talking about, I did not watch growing up. You and I had very different childhoods, I think. But it just wasn't big. We had things, like Pokemon, Sailor Moon, things like that when I was younger. But a lot of, Ghibli films just weren't, a lot of my friends didn't watch it. My parents didn't watch it, so we didn't watch it at home. So I came into this, I guess, fandom when I was an adult, which I think is a very different perspective.
Well, when it comes to this particular film, I discovered it as an adult myself, probably 6 or 7 years ago, when I discovered that Netflix had, put up a lot of Studio Ghibli films. I discovered Studio Ghibli's work for the first time when I was a teenager, and I sort of gravitated towards some of their sort of more darker, mature works, such as Princess Mononoke. But I didn't discover Kiki's Delivery Service until very recently. And soon afterwards, I read the novel that it was based on, just to compare. And I've revisited it just for the purposes of this podcast, because I thought it would be nice if we could do an episode on a film that isn't American or European, which has been pretty much everything we've done up to this point.
Yeah, I actually think it's interesting because obviously this is Japanese, but I watch a lot of Korean films, and I love that there are different cultural aspects that we don't have in Australia. Obviously, again, different culture. So I really like the idea of doing something that was outside of the, American, UK, English-speaking countries. So that's why I was really excited to cover this.
I have to say, watching Kiki's Delivery Service for the first time, I thought to myself, this is one of the most mature, nuanced films I've ever seen, ostensibly aimed at children.
Yeah.
And it does, as you say, deal with coming of age, dealing with the transition from, being, a carefree child, a carefree teenager to, moving out of home and, adjusting to the big bad adult world. Because the main storyline is about this girl, Kiki. She's a witch, and she moves out of her parents' home when she's an early teenager. Because this is set in a magical fantasy land where child labor laws are very relaxed. And so she moves out of home when she's like 13 or 14, and this is like completely normal for this universe. And she has to, find a place to live, get a job, and, learn things like, balancing a budget, scraping together all the money you need to pay the bills and get the groceries and then, still have enough left over to live comfortably. And because she's a witch, and she can fly around on a broomstick, she gets a job basically. She's like an Uber Eats, driver, or like a bicycle courier in a way. That's what the delivery service is that she set up. She's delivering packages for people and she's delivering meals for people. Yeah, I watched this with my partner. We're joking that she's an Uber Eats driver before that was a thing. And yeah, there's no real antagonist to this story. The dramatic conflict is mostly internal, and it's about Kiki trying to find a healthy work-life balance and not letting the 9-to-5 grind get her down, that sort of thing.
I think that was something that really resonated with me. And, I was watching it, and it wasn't until afterwards I was like, this is such an interesting film, because I really resonated with that as an adult. And I think also as a teenager, feeling those pressures of having to, I don't know, prepare yourself for adult life, which I found really interesting. And, it's something like with Kiki, all witches do these things. Kiki is excited for it. However, once, she does move out, get the job at the bakery, delivering things, it's like, she's hit with reality. And I think also her idealized, her idealized, her idea, I suppose, of adolescence is completely different and not really what she's expected. I think that message is really great for kids who are my daughter's age, my older daughter, she's 12, and then that tween period, those tween years, where she's starting to realize responsibilities. And she's starting to realize, when I grow up, I need to do things, to make money and to look after a family, even though you think that, being your parent is gross. So that's something what I really liked about the film, and themes and message.
Well, yeah. I mean, growing up, moving out of home is about more than just being able to, stay up late whenever you want and, go and see R-rated movies and, and just, party without consequence, which, I don't know, for a lot of people who move out of home, they go through that sort of wild period where it's like, it's great, I'm free, I can do whatever I want, no one's going to send me to my room if I misbehave. But then the reality comes crashing in that, taking care of yourself, being mindful of your responsibilities towards others, just getting by from day to day, it's sometimes a challenge.
Well, I realized that I moved out of home when I was 18, for a few months after my 18th birthday. And I lived out of home with, a boyfriend and his sister until I was 20. And those years really hit me as a reality. And I did feel like I needed to grow up very fast, because, I did think I'd be staying at home a little longer, but, circumstances changed. But as soon as I moved out, I was like, okay, I've got to pay rent. I ended up getting a job at a bookshop for a while, kept volunteering, but it was like, oh gosh, I got bills. I have to do all these things. And I was like, this is much more difficult than I realized, which is something that when I was watching this film, I really understood, because I had gone through that, having to grow up quite quickly, but thinking I can do this. I'm an adult now. And yeah, once you are an adult thinking, oh no, I can't do this. This is why adults complain. That all made sense. I love that idea, the scenes were in this film.
Well, I think another thing that, a lot of adults might relate to if they're creative people is a sort of subplot that comes up late into the film where the 9-to-5 grind is getting Kiki down and she starts to sink into depression. And one of the side effects of this is that she loses her powers to fly and speak to animals temporarily. At this time, she befriends a painter who lives nearby in the town that she's staying in. And, the painter gives her a sort of pep talk and says that maybe this is writer's block or artist's block or something like that. And that's another element of the film that I think people who are artists might relate to, is the struggle not just to achieve a certain work-life balance in being mindful of your responsibilities to those you love and your work, but also trying to, make time to, pursue your muse, be creative, that sort of thing. And how sometimes, I don't know, it's easy to get distracted or lose focus when, I don't know, you just get caught up in the minutiae of day-to-day life.
And I think, obviously, when Kiki and Ursula become friends, and because she is the one to say, you do get this writer's block, this is the reality of becoming an adult. But then, and she's having issues using her magic. But then when they go back to a cabin and she shows Kiki the painting she made that was inspired by Kiki's sign, I thought, this is really cool. This is something that is normal in people who are creative. You might get stuck in this rut for ages, but then suddenly something will happen and suddenly something will inspire you. And it can be just as random as, some young witch who's learning to fly, Things like that would just hit you, and that breaks that writer's block, that creative block. So I love that. That was also something that a lot of adults would probably struggle with, because they have all these other responsibilities, and it takes, just one random thing, one unexpected thing to get you back into that creative mode.
Well, yes. I mean, just generally, the thing that I love about Kiki's delivery service is that it presents a lot of hard truths about life that other films aimed at children or aimed at family audiences would just gloss over. And it presents them in such a nuanced way. I mean, a lot of, juvenile media has this emphasis on, following your dream. And, you hit upon like one job that you really desperately want to do, and then you pursue it wholeheartedly and you put everything into it and your dream comes true, and that's it. And there's also, with art, as it's depicted, the creative process in movies is just like, it's often depicted as just like a series of eureka moments, and then everything just flows freely. There's no grind to it. There's no emphasis on practice or honing your craft, or just, having to sometimes just motivate yourself to do something when you've got other things going on in your life. The way this film presents, having a career and being creative, balancing out, being able to spend quality time with those you love as well.
Yeah.
It's a very mature sort of way of advocating for a balanced life, but it sort of reinforces the compromises you have to make as an adult sometimes, which a lot of like children's films don't have these things.
Yeah. As you know, I'm a prolific note taker as I'm watching the film. And one of the notes that I took was, there's a quote that Ursula says. She tells Kiki, so the context is Kiki is worried that she'll never fly again. So Ursula says, then stop trying. Take a long walk, look at the scenery, doze off at noon, don't even think about flying, and then pretty soon you'll be flying again. And I think it's good because it makes you pause, reflect, and just take this big breath and say, okay, this is okay. It's completely fine to have these little breaks in the creative process, and even just learning to do things. That's completely normal. So I really like that an adult was telling a child this, saying, you don't have to win everything. You don't have to complete everything straight away. You don't have to master the thing straight away. You can practice. You can take time for yourself. So I thought that was a great theme and a great thing to tell children from the point of view of an adult.
I think that all of these things, what makes it even more odd that these things pop up in Kiki's delivery service is the fact that it pops up within the context of this subgenre of fantasy. That's a fixture of sort of like Western fiction as well as Eastern fiction.
Yeah.
There's a special kind of, I guess, children's fiction where children take on the roles of an adult, or they assume professional roles that would not be filled by kids in real life. Usually, this takes the form in like Western fiction of like I don't know, some junior ace detective, like some kid detective. I'm thinking of like Nancy Drew or something. And it's a fantasy of like for kids. Like they get to, live out, an adult role. There's some, clever prodigy kid who gets to fill an adult profession. And I said like in Western fiction, it's usually a detective, something like that. And the way this is usually depicted as like they do all the fun things associated with this profession, but they don't have to deal with any of the messy responsibilities attached to it, or the dangers involved are kind of glossed over. Whereas like Kiki, she moves out of home at 14 and gets a job and does all these things. And it's just as hard as if like she moved out of home at 18 and she has to deal with all the messy things that you wouldn't expect to be in this kind of like subgenre of like juvenile wish fulfillment.
Yeah. I think also that actually makes me think of Del Toro Quest by Emily Rodda. So I really loved reading that. I read it as a teenager. And you have, the hero, he's looking for the gems, the bells of Del Toro to reunite Del Toro Quest. And his dad says, I'm too old now. You are the one to do it. And I think Leaf is 14? No, 16. He's a little older than Kiki. And so he sets off on this adventure. He meets, he goes with Barda, who is an adult. He sets off into the woods, into this creepy forest that he shouldn't be in, that are full of dangers. But there he meets Jasmine, who is this wild girl in the forest. And she knows how to defend herself. So I think that is a sort of a balance between, taking on that adult role of saving the world, but also the realities of having to defend yourself against these adult problems, because a lot of their antagonists are adults. So I'm not sure like what the theme could be about that. I don't know, saying adult for scare. Obviously very different to Kiki's Delivery Service, but just the theme of having to grow up and deal with adult problems. I thought was really interesting that is in some literature, but not all. Only a little bit of books for kids.
Well, I must admit that just generally, whenever I return to some of this media as an adult, I'm more uncomfortable, or I notice it more when I see children placed in dangerous situations. I'm thinking about the Harry Potter series and how there's one story in the series where the principal of the school, Dumbledore, sort of gets the sack because like the wizardry equivalent of like child welfare services point out to him that, kids do tend to be placed in perilous life and death situations a lot under your watch. With regards to, I don't know, Kiki's Delivery Service, I kept thinking whenever she was performing some death-defying flying maneuver on her broomstick, I kept thinking that she's younger than, most kids are when they learn how to drive.
We think also in Harry Potter, learning to fly, play Quidditch and things like that, they're like 11. But still, I'm like, that's way too young, because when you play Quidditch, like obviously Harry is, he's very young and he starts playing Quidditch. Everyone else, his opponents are much older. And I'm like, oh my God, like he falls off his broom and he has to pick himself up, and I'm like, you could die.
Well, yeah, I don't see any safety nets like on the Quidditch field or whatever. Yeah,
Something like that. It's like people have died, people have like disappeared, and I was like, children should not be doing this. So yeah, when I was watching Kiki's Delivery Service, I did think of this and broomsticks and just Harry being way too young to be doing a death-defying stunts and being stuck in a storm where anyone could just fall off and die. So I like that common element with Kiki's Delivery Service.
or just there's so many scenes in this movie that are odd just because the character's 13 or 14. Like when at the start of the movie, when she says to her parents, like, "Oh, I'm a teenager now. I guess I have to move out and get a job." And they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah." And then I guess I was also just thinking about you watching this with your daughter. She's 12 or something.
She's
Like
12 today.
12, say. I guess she was 11 when you started watching this. I wonder if, like, when you were sitting watching Kiki, like, going out and getting a job and trying to balance her food budget, were you, like, saying to her, like, this'll be you in 3 years' time. You're like, no freeloading off of me. You're like, onto the street you go and go out and get a job, you hippie.
Go out, get. I did make a few comments, not a lot, but I was like, yeah, this is what adults have to do. And she's like, oh, really? And I was like, yeah, this is why you have to, get groceries and things like this, go out and have responsibilities. And she's like, but I'm a kid. And I'm like, well, Kiki's a kid too. And she's like, oh, but I don't think she thought about that until watching this movie. And I thought that was interesting. But obviously, kids don't think that. Kids are like, adults, parents, or, adult caretakers. They do all these things. They're the ones who look after kids. But then when you realize, like someone is very young who does this and has to adapt. I think Isabel said, why did her parent kick her? Like, why did she leave? She's too young. But I think it was interesting that even she realized that, saying, why is she putting in this adult situation?
I don't know whether this, like, film or the novel was intended as being like a subversion of this trope of, like, this wish fulfillment fantasy subgenre of, the kid hero, the prodigy who takes on an adult role, an adult profession. Like I said, there's quite a few, like, kids books that I read when I was a child about, like, there's this series called Nate the Great about this boy detective who likes to eat pancakes, and it's quite silly. But I wasn't thinking about how, he's doing things that, like, most kids wouldn't do. I think that was part of the appeal, part of the fantasy. I think Kiki's Delivery Service, they took the typical setup of this genre and then actually, like, followed it through to its logical conclusion. It doesn't seem strange to talk about logic within the context of the film with, like, people flying around on broomsticks or whatever. But the day-to-day life, like maintaining a profession as, like, a delivery driver or whatever. I don't know if it was an attempt at subversion or if it was just that it was just a more thoughtful example of this genre that is typical.
I don't know, because I think you can look at the film in different ways. So maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Like, was there any interviews about, like, the meaning and why she was about that? I'm not sure.
I haven't looked up any interviews with either Hayao Miyazaki, the writer-director of the film, or Eiko Kodono, the writer of the novel. In some ways, the novel is a bit less dark than the film is. I mentioned how in the film, Kiki lets the 9-to-5 grind get her down and she becomes depressed, and as a side effect of this, she loses her power, basically. That doesn't happen in the book. I mean, she does, get depressed, but it doesn't have the side effect of making her, like, lose her ability to fly or talk to her familiar cat. It's just an emotional stumbling block in her life.
Why do you think that was changed?
I think it was probably just changed to sort of up the stakes of the drama. The other changes that it makes to the book is really more like a series of interconnected short stories than a straight novel with a big beginning, middle, and end. And there are a lot of shorter vignettes of Kiki sort of helping out other people around the neighborhood that aren't really connected to, like, her character development or anything like that. They're just, like, funny incidental moments. Like, she helps this guy who's the caretaker of a clock tower, like, find a missing engine part, or there's a band that, they on their way to the gig, but they leave their instruments on a train, and she has to, go and catch up with the train and get their instruments back. And, like, all these, like, funny stories that aren't really connected to Kiki's character development at all. So I think probably the changes were made just to streamline the narrative and sort of up the emotional stakes in the third act, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So kind of like mini quests that she goes through, just small little things, but not really, not connected to, I guess, the main quest. So I guess it's okay to leave those out in a film adaptation.
Like those shit missions in a video game where you're like, you have the option to find something for someone for some bonus points or something.
I think it doesn't take away from the message at all.
Well, I've read the book and I find it charming. I have mixed feelings about the way it depicts her losing her powers, especially the way it shows her, I don't know, losing her ability to communicate with her familiar, her pet cat Gigi, who is in the novel like a confident and, emotional support during these troubled times for her. So that changes the thematic dynamic significantly. But it's interesting. There was a live action film adaptation of Kiki's Delivery Service made in the 21st century. And it tried to be, I haven't seen it either, but I've heard it tried to be more faithful to the novel, eliminating like scenes that were created specifically for the Studio Ghibli film and putting things back in that were, from the book. And guess what? A lot of reviewers complained that it wasn't like the Studio Ghibli film. And less popular. So there you go.
It's just because the themes will be different. So a lot of the things that I discovered when I was writing the anime adaptations are a lot of the adaptation. Some of them is very loose. They're very loose when it goes to plot and things like that, but they do have similar themes. So do you think maybe that's why this was left out? Why it was so different from the plot of the novel?
I don't know. I haven't discussed it with Hayao Miyazaki. He's not returning my phone calls. Look, as I said, I think it was probably just done to streamline the narrative and up the emotional stakes a bit for the purposes of drama. And as for what you were saying about themes and character development, I'm no literary purist myself, and my own philosophy about adapting works of literature to the screen is I can cope with changes to dialogue and plot structure. I think often it's necessary to change those things in the translation from one medium to another. I can cope with that provided they stay loyal to the core themes and characterization of the work. And also, I would say people are loyal mostly to the version that they saw first or read first. I think this is one of those cases, Everending Story is another, where the adaptation is more famous than the original work. The original work, at least outside of Japan, is quite obscure and only became well known through the film. Because the film is most people's first introduction to this story, they're loyal to that version and they're not going to compare it.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that I wasn't aware that there was a novel where I first saw the film. It was only after that I was like, oh, it is a novel. And then I couldn't compare it to things, and I really enjoyed it. Like I saw some flaws in it, but it was just to me, watching it, it was like a standalone movie. It was something that was just created by the director. So yeah, that didn't bother me at all.
I think since we're on the subject of like different versions of the same story, can we talk about the whole subbing versus dubbing debate? I'm curious, did you watch this in Japanese with English subtitles, or did you watch the English dubbed version?
I watched the English dubbed version. There are some things that I did watch again, the Japanese version. So sometimes Isabel, my daughter, she will watch things in just Japanese, and she's fine with that because she's learning subtitles. But there are other things where I think she wants, to pay attention a bit more to the storyline. So in her still learning, we watched it in English because that was just more accessible for her as well. But I do understand that there are differences. And when things are either, subtitles or dubbed, there, obviously the dialogue isn't the same. And something, as they say, can be lost in translation. I think that is a big part, obviously, of the differences as well.
When it comes to dubbing versus subtitles, my view on this is when it comes to live action movies, I can't really watch, foreign films that are dubbed into English, usually because the a lot of the time the lip movement isn't perfectly insert. But but also if the actor is like the foreign actor being dubbed into English is someone that I know and I've heard their voice, their natural voice, speaking their own language in other films, that hearing a different voice coming out of their mouth is just very jarring and unnatural to me. However, when I'm watching an animation, because the visual image that's matched up with the voice is like an animated character, I'm more flexible. And usually I find that English dubbing of foreign animated films tends to be better when it comes to like matching the lip movement, but also finding voices that seem to fit with the visual image of the character.
Yeah. The characters, if they are voiced by well-known movie stars, actors, I think you can get a bit distracted.
And I have heard some people say that if the person doing the voiceover for an animation is a well-known celebrity, sometimes it can take them out of the moment as well. Personally, I don't have that issue. So the thing is that I watched Kiki's delivery service with the 1995 English language dub. There was one made in the late 80s, I believe, a different English language dub I'm unfamiliar with. I haven't watched the whole film straight through in Japanese with English subtitles. I'm primarily talking about this from the perspective of someone who is familiar with the English dub, which also includes a couple of pop songs by Sydney Forrest, which are not part of the original Japanese soundtrack. I think it all blends in seamlessly. Like, I don't think it feels out of place. There's these sort of mellow acoustic ballads with very optimistic lyrics, and they fit in with sort of Joe Hisashi's sort of soaring, gently soothing, string-heavy score as well.
A lot of people might not even watch it if, might not experience the different film versions if they're not into anime.
Okay, the reason that I watched Kiki's delivery service in the English dubbed version is just so that my eyeballs wouldn't have to like go to the bottom of the screen, and I could just take in the beauty of the landscape in full. And I think the main reason for that is because the landscapes in this film are so gorgeous. And you could take many sort of stills from this film and turn them into a postcard or something, or an image use them as an image on a desk calendar. They're so gorgeous just on their own before things start moving around within them, these landscapes. And I also love the sort of strange hybrid architecture, the mixture of sort of Japanese and European style that's in like the towns, and the way that it mixes up technology from different time periods as well. It has a very unique look, this film.
Yeah. Young grasshopper, not able to watch, subtitles and experience the visual beauty. I watch a lot of subtitles films, so I have that magical ability to watch things and then also read subtitles really, really quickly, which does not translate to any other skills in life. I can't put that down on my resume. But speaking about the architecture and everything like that, I really liked it. I really thought it was a blend of different cultures, and it was so unique and just so interesting. Kind of like, with steampunk and stuff like that. They have those a lot of industrial kind of looking buildings and things like that. But then they also have a lot of what they call, again, pre-industrial machines, things like that. Yeah, I think that was a really cool concept of having both culturally kind of hang on, I want to say
a sort of melting pot of different cultures. Is that what you're going to say?
Yes. So I think it was interesting to have, as you mentioned before, a sort of melting pot of different cultures, which a lot of people could watch from, English speaking backgrounds or who aren't Japanese or living in Japan, we can also get that. We can also see the way that Japanese cultures are, then also have a bit more relatable, landscapes and architecture that we're used to. Not to say that you need to or anything like that, but I thought that was interesting. So we're familiar with the way that these towns are, but then also get little bits of differences that we can say, oh, that's really cool. Maybe you become interested in Japanese architecture and you'd like to, look things up. But I really thought it was a really cool blend of differences.
Like, for anyone who is a fan of steampunk aesthetics, I mean, check it out. I mean, Kiki's Delivery Service is not something that's marketed as steampunk, but it has a lot of things in its sort of general visual aesthetic that are likely to appeal to that crowd. So, I'm a foodie myself. One other thing I love about Studio Ghibli's films is any scene they have with the preparation of food, even though it's animated. I mean, it makes me feel hungry watching it, or just, oh, that looks so good. And like, she gets a job, like, she worked at a bakery. She lives in a room upstairs from a bakery, and there's all these scenes of like bread and pastry being made, and hot chocolate being poured, and it just looks so delectable. And I'm not surprised that there's more than one unofficial Studio Ghibli cookbook out there that you could buy. I was in Dimmicks, that's an Australian bookstore, the other day, and I noticed that there were several like unofficial Studio Ghibli cookbooks where people try to make dishes from the various Studio Ghibli animations, including Kiki's Delivery Service. So, yeah, for foodies, this is also a treat to watch.
I know you've also said that you've got cookbooks of like Firefly and other things as well. So I think also it's just a really cool kind of additional thing, especially even for Kiki's Delivery Service. So you watch these films and you think, I want to try this, and you can. Feel free to look it up on the internet and things like that. So I like that, and I did like the emphasis on food because I think that's a big part of Japanese culture. I think that's a big part of family as well. Kiki sort of discovers, a found family, living away from her parents. So I thought that was really cool as well. And I definitely agree that you're watching it thinking, oh, I'm hungry now. I wonder what that smells like. Oh, it seems so good. So yeah, I think that's a really cool part of the film.
On the subject of that found family, I just want to mention the quality of the voice acting for this movie in the English dubbed version, because none of the cast are sort of phoning it in for an easy paycheck. Kirsten Dunst I think, is very nuanced in, her performance as Kiki. Bill Hartman as her pet, her familiar, her cat, Gigi, has a lot of like great deadpan, snarky, humorous lines. And I've been told that he was allowed to ad-lib a bit. That might be part of why the English dubbed version of Kiki's Delivery Service is a bit contentious, because he was allowed to cut loose a bit. But he's a funny guy. And Janine Garofalo, the American comedian, plays the artist Ursula, who becomes a sort of friend and mentor to Kiki. And it's a pretty much a straight role for her, and she does a good job. And like anyone who is a fan of the like old school Hollywood song and dance star Debbie Reynolds, this is one of her last roles, voicing an old lady in this movie. Kiki helps her like make a pie at some point, and another great foodie scene from the film.
Yeah,
right.
I loved that scene, and I loved her character, and I love that dynamic between them. So Kiki's like learning from a much more experienced person, and then I actually thought of Kiki being that age, and then also mentoring someone else. So her learning these skills, and perhaps in the future taking on that role. We don't know who she's going to be when she's an adult, but I really liked that dynamic. I thought that was really cool.
I know that there's a series of sequels with regards to the novels. Like there's there's more books in the series. I haven't read them though.
Oh, cool.
I think that's pretty much all I have to say about Kiki's Delivery Service. If you have anything you'd like to add, do so. Fire away.
I think I'll say something to wrap things up. What I mainly learned from it, even though, I've mentioned a few things, is Kiki learned to break away from, I think, tradition and what she thought that teenagers and adults need to be. And I think she realized that we all have our own path. Like, we all have our own paths and our own lives. And we all go in our own directions. We don't need to be like our parents. And I think also, even though, it's normal in that universe to leave her parents, I think one of the things is not living with her parents means she doesn't have to do everything they do. She has this ability to explore the world and to meet so many different people. And I think that shapes her personality. And obviously will shape her personality as an adult. She breaks away from tradition. She becomes her own witch. She learns things in her own way. So I think that was a great message that I took away when I finished watching it, which I just think is really cool and, really sweet as well. And so again, it appeals to children and adults alike. So that's why I really loved it.
Yeah, it's a really layered, very, sophisticated movie. And yeah, and it's something that, to use an old cliche, the whole family can enjoy. It's just wonderful. That's all for this week, folks. Thanks for listening. If you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing and sharing this podcast with your friends. If you have any questions or would like to provide suggestions for future episodes, you can send an email to fantasypodcastfeedback@gmail.com. Until next time, cheers.